gets bigger, you know.
Ba-dum-bum.
Happens everywhere in Hollywood, you know.
So to speak.
Okay,
Is that why that hat barely
live.
fits?
Video
there,
is
Courtney?
video is live. We're on the countdown right now, so we got 4:26 to go. So, Guy, I'll let you know when we're at about the 20-second mark, and then I'll do the countdown from there. Your screen will be instantly on. So I would say, if you hopefully you can hear it because your video's off. If you can, if I do a 3, 2, 1, just do a 1, 2, 3 before you start speaking.
Is our audio going out there too then, Jeffrey?
Nope, audio is.
Got it. Thank you.
Hold on.
Video is not allowed to be enabled.
Hello and welcome to Office Hours. If you're watching on YouTube, in the description, you'll find a link to come on over to our side, which is in Zoom. And in Zoom, you'll find in the chat a link over to Mukana. And Mukana is where you can ask questions. Now, these questions drive this show. So we'll actually be going through these questions, and the ones that are voted on the most are the ones that we spend the most time on. So get your questions in early. So if you're new, you'll want to see how the questions are crafted, and if you've been around a little while, make sure to get those questions in, vote them up, or store some of your questions later. Think about them all day and shove them in there. And the show's mostly about production, so media production. We're talking about things like virtual events, and a lot of this stuff is changing the landscapes. There are certain people that are watching this show right now that make decisions, and so we've seen things change based on some of what's been said on this panel. So we're going to have an excellent show today. Usually we'll have a second hour with a special topic or a special guest. Today is just straight questions, so it's just 2 hours of straight up questions, and then afterwards we'll have a post show for those of you that are interested. Yeah, let's go ahead and go to Courtney.
There are a lot cheaper. If you don't need 1080p, if you're just doing normal zoom 720p high def, there's lots of, like the B-Link by Courtney, lots of small Windows boxes for around $150 to $200 if you're sensitive to the price of 10 Mac Minis. Those small boxes with the MJ4125 processor have quick link video in it, so it does hardware encode and decode. Is certainly fast enough for Zoom rooms, but it will save your budget because you can buy about 10 of those for around $2,000. So.
All right, Roscoe.
Well, as soon as he says Zoom OSC, do we assume then we're coming out to a hardware switcher? Because you could, if you offload some of that, processor need to something in the cloud, then I think you might be able to go with one beefy computer. That being said, of course, I'm a big fan of lots of Mac Minis.
All righty, let's go ahead and hit the next question.
Comes to us from Ari Block in Tel Aviv, Israel. And Ari asks, it seems that more and more of the programs and applications, ProPresenter, Cinamaker, and so forth, are adding the ability to ingest Zoom directly. How does this panel think this will impact both workflows and a business model for producers?
Do we have somebody? Roscoe, go for it.
Well, the smaller the operation, the more you can offload, kind of what I was just talking about, into software. Then I think Zoom is, Zoom is just going to become an online application. And I think a lot of the ProPresenters and the Cinemakers, they have specific markets. Well, and Cinemaker doesn't. Cinemaker is kind of this new tool that I'm not sure who exactly is using it. It's iPhones running through an iPad that basically puts together a whole studio. But ProPresenter kind of has its market. And I think that market's, they're definitely going to take Zoom and do what they can with it. Although most of the worship market is going to try and return to in-person events, I believe.
Yeah, Jonas and then Rupert.
I think it will change how Zoom looks, like the average Zoom looks, which is pretty important for when I try to sell an event on Zoom to a client, they still have the average Zoom experience, which is really bad audio, bad video. And by pushing tools into other tools that people already get and pushing out a great feed to Zoom is just like 1 or 2 clicks more. I really hope that it will raise the average Zoom meeting. So people realize that Zoom is just a platform where you can have amazing video, amazing like audio. We all know that the capabilities are there, but the average Zoom meeting is still too low for most people to realize how good Zoom is. And I think that will be a great push.
Rupert.
So I think the amount of impact it could have, as in when I read the question, I'm thinking negative impact, but really that's depending on how open you are to change. And I've been in technology a long time and things change all the time. And here we are seeing a whole load of new tools emerge and be developed. Let's not get complacent and think that once that's done, it's going to stay the same. It's going to change again and again and again. So you really just need to keep an open mind, especially if you're building a business around these things. Be ready to adapt again and always.
Bill Davis.
It's interesting to me that the explosion of Zoom capability and literacy followed on with a pandemic and all this negativity, because I would have expected people to have spent more time learning to do Zoom well, but I think that most of that got short-circuited by the fact that it was suddenly, we're all stuck at home, the kids are around, we have to do this. And I'm still shocked in the corporate Zoom meetings that I attend at how little attention people generally pay to the idea of being on Zoom. I still see horribly framed shots, lousy audio, all this stuff a year after, if this had grown up as an organic part of putting it into people's homes and lives. For example, like television was rolled out or radio was rolled out, where you had to actually make adjustments to get the signals. I think we would be at a different place, but we're not. And I don't know if we're ever going to come back. Being on these services just now seems like, yeah, I'll just do it. I'll just turn it on. What the heck? And I'm kind of sad about that. I wish we had had a little more ramp into this new version of interacting person to person, because I think we all would have benefited from that.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think a lot of people like Mark Cuban, for example, are doing interviews from home, and they've just got accustomed to it. And the mantra is what I've been doing. A lot of these, I look and sound great, but if they were to watch the return feed and listen to how they compare to others, all of a sudden it's like, hey, maybe I don't sound as good. I don't look as good. And people that have been given a kit to borrow, they frequently want to keep the kit, and they ask, how much is this? Because they see the difference, and it's pretty powerful. All right, let's go ahead and take the next question.
Comes to us from Rupert McCrae in Dallas, Texas. And Rupert says, it's estimated that Google, Facebook, Amazon, and Microsoft have spent over $1.5 billion on submarine fiber optic cable construction in the last 5 years. Does this help the general user or just benefit those providers between their own data centers?
I would think that it's always nice to have a backup compared to how many lines do we have? Isn't it only like 1 or 2 that are going across? So having multiples, or let's see what Elon does. Bill and then Rupert.
You know, if you ever play with the tool traceroute, it's half the time the call between you and your cousin 2 cities over is going through Beirut, the way things are routed. So the fact that the data centers get faster between the major nodes really does help everybody, because there's so many possibilities for pathways that the more capacity, I think, the better for everybody, even if you're at the fine little end of just me and my house.
Rupert and then Court.
So I guess in reality, there's dozens, if not hundreds, of cables all over the place. In fact, there is a website that will map them out for you, and they're all over the place. I just wonder whether the big players got tired maybe of paying other people for the bandwidth, so just went ahead and laid their own.
Courtney?
Yeah, I think it is less traffic over their own trunk lines. And cable, of course, is the alternative would be satellite, and the latency is much, much worse on satellites. And so for two-way communications and live communications, they're better off running fiber. So that's why they're doing it.
Yeah, it's amazing to see the latency with fiber. I mean, we've got people from all over the world. We've got Karl in Australia. We've got Jonas in Germany. John, you're in Sweden, or where are you coming in from, John? Sweden? Yeah, and the latency is 500 milliseconds or so. Not even that. We're not even half a second to get to these guys. And who remembers how much it used to cost to make these calls, and now we're doing it for almost free. All right, let's take the next question, Bill.
Rupert McCrae is back again from Dallas, Texas, with a request for us. I misspoke, he says, during the answer to a question on office hours on Saturday. May I have a moment to clarify?
Go for it, Rupert. Tell us what happened.
I listen back to all the shows that we do, or try to and watch and listen. And so it was on Saturday, and we had a question about voice over IP. In fact, it was my question. We got talking back and forth on it. And I just really wanted to apologize to Roscoe, because he made a good point in terms of a metaphor of how to explain some of this stuff. And the engineering kind of part of me took over a little bit and tried to correct him on that. But really, it was a good analogy. And so I just wanted to apologize and clarify for anybody listening that, in fact, his way of explaining it was a good way to think about it. So sorry, Roscoe.
Man, that's
good
awesome
here.
of you to be humble.
As long as the truth comes out, everything is perfectly good here. We are great. So.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times we'll see some answers that don't come across as perfect, and if we go back and we look at them and we can recorrect them, I mean, that's super humbling to do so. So thank you for doing that, Rupert. Bill, you want to add on to that?
Yeah, I want to publicly apologize for virtually everything I said in the first 3 months I was here. So there were a lot of things that over the course of decades in this business, a lot of things I was right about and I understood, but I also spoke on things that, while I had a decent understanding, it wasn't refined. And we're always going to make mistakes. The answers that everybody gets from us today are, to the best of my knowledge, with what I've been able to learn. I am trying to help, and we're going to get it mostly right, I believe. This is a very, very talented panel with people who have spent a lot of time practically using this technology, but we are going to be wrong about some little things. And since I spent about a decade as a columnist for a magazine, let me tell you, even with all the effort I put into those articles and the technical advisors I had, still we would get letters. You were not entirely right about this, and they would go on at length. And that's just part of doing this in public. We're going to be wrong. We are trying to be the best we can be.
Jesse Schwartz.
Yeah, and I want to pre-apologize for all the stupid things I know I'm going to say in the future.
Thanks for that. Scott, you had your hand up before you took your sip of coffee there. You want to?
Jesse beat me to it. I just, it's like, thank you, Jesse.
Sky, you're too slow on the trigger, man.
I'm practicing, and that's all about. It's practice.
It's my little box. That's why I got so much faster at stuff.
I'll get better at being worse.
And the interesting thing is that, this landscape is constantly changing. It's constantly evolving. And I think that's why a lot of us show up every day, is because your answer last week may not be the same this week, because things are constantly changing. And behind the scenes, some of us are running beta stuff, and we already know the answer, and we just have to bite our lips sometimes and just be like, I know what's going on, but you just got to just roll. So there's interesting stuff coming, and a lot of people know a lot of interesting stuff. Let's go ahead and move on to the next question from the Seventh Scroll.
Seventh Scroll is back from Brooklyn for stage events, church, lectures, concerts, and so forth. Would you recommend Blackmagic cameras, seeing there's no autofocus and talent is potentially on the move? And he's using a Blackmagic switcher in this case. They are using, because I think there's a couple there.
Karl and then Jonas.
So if you're using a Blackmagic switcher, let's say using an ATEM Mini or an ATEM Extreme, which has HDMI, you can use the pocket cinema cameras. They do have one touch focus, so you touch it and focuses whatever the box is on. So you will need a camera operator that knows what they're doing, or you can manually focus with peaking. So again, you'll need a camera operator that knows what they're doing. That's kind of true for all these kind of events. You do want an operator who knows how to focus the camera, who knows how to point the camera. That's generally what you need. If it's on a PTZ, then just shut down the aperture, rack up the ISO and just have everything in focus. You don't have to worry about focus. You have to worry about where it points. But the Blackmagics are good. They do have one-touch autofocus, but a skilled operator will make short work, making things a lot easier.
Jonas?
What you actually can do with especially the ATEM Mini, you can now step focus. So it's not only touch focus. We, for some events, when you have static cameras, I start you doing focus via the software control or via the ATEM Mini Extreme, because it has a button to rack focus. But oftentimes you can't afford the Blackmagic cameras, and we are using Panasonic's G7 with our ATEM Mini Extreme at our church. And they work totally fine. We do train our operators more on them because I can't, doing the show, I can't remotely control them, but I think that's also a great way to do it.
Roscoe?
Yeah, I was just going to say, adding a lot of knobs and stuff on the side so that the camera operator don't have to reach all the way around to the lens really is helpful. It just makes it bring everything you can back to the operator when possible. There is the remote autofocus, but nothing beats having a real person there looking. And the autofocus or the focus assist is very good on those cameras too. Just set it to the right color that doesn't match your stage.
Nice. All right. So I see lots of questions. Not a whole lot of votes. If everybody, I see 149 people are here, and there's probably more watching on YouTube. If you could throw a vote on one of your favorite questions and pop up to the top, I'd really appreciate that. And I think the rest of the panel would as well, and the rest of the producers playing along. All right. Next question.
Seven Scrolls back from Brooklyn for stage events. Church. Oh, wait a second. That was just what I hit. So let me go to the next one. I have a Ubiquiti EdgeRouter Lite to use as a failover between two ISPs, says Matt Cool of Montreal, Quebec. When I unplug the main ISP, there's about a 30-second delay while switching. Is there any way to speed this up?
Go ahead, Rupert.
It's been a while since I've done that, but I'm pretty sure it's the Watchdog service that keeps an eye on that. So either look that up or try and find the configuration for that.
Yeah, that sounds about right. That's the same way we have our two set up. I have one here at home and I have one at the office, and they're both set up that same way to fail over. And that's from our networking guy that works at Microsoft who set ours up. He was saying that that's the best way to do it is direct failover. Don't bond the two together because you can get packets going on two different routes and two different providers, and it can mess things up. So yeah, you just got to kind of bite the bullet on that one. Another thing that you can do though is software. If you can't go down at all, is you can use Speedify and bond to that way too to have a secondary something going on there. Another route to take a look at. Actually, Jonas, you have some experience with that. Have you used Speedify to bond to?
Yeah, I use Speedify when we have WebRTC traffic because they have a mode special for that. So it cleans up a bit of the packet loss by sending more packets probably. And what I also do on location when we stream and are not using the ATEM, we bound together the location internet and head a phone to the laptop and then use that as fallback. We don't bound, but it will switch automatically and it switches faster. Like I don't notice it, but it just jumps over to the next connection. And I had streams where later you can see it and it tells you like it switched over 50 times. Then you're really glad that you have it.
Nice. Rupert.
Yeah, Doug Johnson Productions, he's got a pretty good video on his YouTube channel on how he bonded all kinds of cell phones and different things together to get a bigger signal. It was either through Speedify or something similar, but maybe check that out.
Yeah, it's worth looking. I know that Tucker uses PEP waves as well, and other people like Jeff Keithley have some solutions. Maybe if he's in the chat, these guys can populate those links. And if you could throw that, if you find Doug's video, Rupert, if you could pop that in the chat, that'd be cool. Next question.
Comes to us from Eric Price, and Eric is in Leavenworth, Kansas, and says, during last week's Ruthless video reviews, I think that was Tuesday or Wednesday, Karl spoke briefly about the ease of color settings between Canon, Sony, and Blackmagic. Looking to potentially get a Blackmagic design, but wondered what Canon Karl would suggest as an alternative.
So as far as what we do here, So I'm talking about live events where you're taking HDMI out of the camera. You're not essentially, your main use of that camera is live streaming, if that's going to be the point. Blackmagic is good. There is one Canon camera that will probably beat it, but it doesn't have all the features in the recording side of the Blackmagic. So that's a C100 Mark II. So it's a 4K sensor, but it only outputs 1080, same as the Pockets, but it only records 1080. So it doesn't record 4K. Its color science is out of the box. You just set it to pretty much standard. It can output log, so you can make this into a HDR stream if you want to do like what we are planning to do with 2.0 of office hours. So you can send out Canon log and put it into a HDR pipeline. But also it has 2 XLR inputs, so you have good quality audio going in with phantom power. So they're full-size XLRs, so you don't have to adapt anything. The other thing with this particular camera that makes it very useful over the Blackmagic, it has face-only autofocus. That's it. So this is a dual pixel sensor that Canon has. So when it comes to autofocus, you can have this follow a person, follow an object, but you can also say only focus on a face when you see a face and only change focus when that face moves. So that's another thing that this camera can do over the Blackmagics as well.
Sky Gleason, you want to add on to that?
I would just ask Carl what his opinion about the GH5, the Lumix camera.
So they're terrible focus. They're contrast detect only. They do have some, like, in theory, they do have like this phase, but it doesn't really work. So every person I know that has a Panasonic, the thing they shake their fist at the sky for is going to be autofocus. So if you're locking your focus for cinema kind of use where you're manual focus, a lot of people don't mind it for that. But for live events, if you need autofocus, just steer clear of the Panasonic still cameras. They're still cameras foremost. That's the main thing. The one I'm showing here is a video camera only. It doesn't take a still photo ever. It could never take a still photo.
Jesse Schwartz.
Carl, what would be the next level up if you wanted the 4K?
C200. So C200 is a beautiful camera. There's 2 versions. There's the one without the optical viewfinder and the one with the optical viewfinder. So it's $4,000 without the optical viewfinder, and that's a camera you'll see on the Ronin, like the Ronin S, the handheld gimbal. It fits perfectly onto that gimbal as well. So yeah, the C200, which has built-in RAW, so it records RAW and it's 10-bit. So that's a killer there. Then you're going up to the C300, which is, we're getting close to cinema cameras there. But as far as a live production camera, the C100 Mark II, with its color science, with its Canon log output if you want log output, and the fact that it has XLR inputs, so full-size XLR inputs, so you can use it as an audio input point in your live production, and the fact the colors are just rock solid. You know, you can't lose with that.
Awesome, and thanks everybody for upvoting questions. We're getting 9s and 8s and 7s. That's great to see. All right, next question.
Eric Price of Leavenworth, Kansas is done, and we're moving on to Douglas Carmichael. And Doug says, what has everyone's experience been with the M1 Max in production, given that so many vendors don't have native support yet?
Carl, go for it.
So just quickly, I'm in the Apple ecosystem, so I use Logic and, Final Cut and all that fun stuff. So for me, it's perfect.
Bill Davis.
Oops. I think everybody understood when Apple came out with these models that they were starting at the bottom end of their line. These are really the lowest powered machines they sell in general. It shocked everybody that this processor, the new M series processors from Apple, elevated the actual performance of these into the middle of the range, right below their professional grade stuff. But everybody is expecting universally around the world sometime in this year for the proer level machines to start adopting the M series chips. We're also thinking that there may be in Apple's chip foundries new levels of chips, some sort of an M series Pro of some kind, although there's all sorts of speculation about what it'll be called. When those two things married, I think that's the point where the professional industry will take a very serious look at how much performance increase do these provide, and is it time to change hardware and our approach to things? So we'll see. Nobody knows for sure, but those are my thoughts from kind of reading the general press about what's going on.
Yeah, Roscoe Jones and then Jeffrey Powers.
They're really, really quiet, and it's not just production software that's not up to date. My school bought 1,200 M1s laptops to hand out to every. So basically, we do rollout computers, and we're replacing them all with M1 laptops. Nobody's getting an iMac anymore. Everyone's getting an M1 and a Dell. I think it's a 1080p we're getting, or 4K if you want to pay for the upgrade. If your department wants to pay for the upgrade. Long story short, they started rolling them out and then immediately had to pull them all back because none of the security software works.
Jeffrey Powers.
So I talk with a lot of startups and a lot of companies that build software that will work for the Mac, but it's not high end stuff. So they're making something off of it, but not as much. But when they switched the M1, not only the fact that they had to worry about Big Sur and all the new privacy stuff, which they weren't on there, they had to worry about producing for a new processor. And I know many companies that are saying we're just years away from even starting to look at what M1 or whatever version is going to be out there next. And they need help. They need lots of help in this. And that's the real frustrating thing on that is you put your money and effort into one product as a customer, and the company can't update it because of the fact that there's a new processor on there, and that gets really tough. If you love or hate Windows, they still have this ability to thunk down and do some previous operating system stuff for the most part. Even Windows 11, which is still bouncing back and forth between the what they're going to support and what they're not going to support. There's always going to be some backwards compatibility if the enterprise says, "Hey, we need it this way."
Yeah, Courtney.
Yeah, if you look at, I'll put a link in the chat. Doug Johnson did a extensive teardown on the M1s as far as comparison of rendering times if you're doing video production. Live stuff, it works great for Zoom and everything else. But he found that renders, things like that, were compared to equivalent priced either PC-based or the higher-end Macs, it still falls down quite a bit. So it's not as compatible or hasn't been optimized as much yet for that particular processor, Uniblock processor.
Yeah, I'm excited to see how all this unfolds. I picked up one of the basic Mac Mini M1s with the $699 one with just the 8 gigs of RAM. And I kind of regret doing that because the 16 gigs I'm hearing now, there was a tweet yesterday from Sidney Digson, I believe is how you say his name, about how much faster a Final Cut export was with just having the additional RAM, which is kind of shocking because the machine feels very snappy for everything else. But then to hear that renders can be faster with RAM is a new one to me. Rupert.
So just keep in mind that if you think the future for you may involve moving to the cloud, that's a different world if you're on the Mac platform. You have to go to some different places, and it's just not as easy. So if that's your roadmap, just maybe consider it carefully.
All righty, next question.
John Baker in Malmö, Sweden is up next with, we have a new YouTube channel. This is where all the streams and recordings will be posted. Is this where all the streams and recordings will be posted, or will it be on both the old and new channels for a while? And by we, he must, I don't know if he means their business or office hours.
And that name is that guy on the panel. John, you want to give us how you say your last name?
My whole life I've been Baker, but it's actually Barker. So close.
There we go.
My apologies.
No
and just to clarify, I mean the office hours live stream channel. I hadn't seen that until today.
Jeffrey's handling that. So Jeffrey has his hand up. Let's go ahead and hear from him.
So basically, that's the idea all along, is to get it off of this channel, which is not a regular, or it's a personal channel, not a brand channel. And so Office Hours Global is going to be the brand channel. The reason why we're streaming from here is because of the complexity that it takes to actually do the Zoom to YouTube. Alex needs to be here for that. And of course, Alex, when Alex can't be here, then a lot of times we run into problems. Last Friday, week ago Friday, was a perfect example on that. And kind of glad we didn't do the YouTube because, we get a chance to redo that whole session. The whole point is that this is eventually going to be, but it might bounce back to the other channel right now, simply because of the fact I can actually do the re-scrape into YouTube and do all the switching right here for that. So expect it to bounce back for a little while because there's still a lot of things that we need to add to the YouTube channel to make it official. But yeah, you can definitely subscribe to the other one, watch for it. But it will not do a dual stream. Not at all.
Yeah, on that note, is there anything that we should be doing besides subscribing to kind of give that thing some juice? Is there anything, we've got a couple hundred people watching, is there a way that we can do anything else to boost that algorithm?
Not at this time. We're still working out all the bells and whistles, the I's and T's and stuff like that. So,
Sky Gleason.
Just again, a quick plug. Jeffrey does annotation throughout the YouTube, and at the end of each session, this is scraped and put over into the Discord in the chat links, so that if you want to look at the archives and do some ability to search, hopefully over there on the chat, I'm sorry, on the Discord, that information is archived.
Yeah, thank you for doing that every day, Jeffrey. I've gone through on the desktop version of Mukana trying to find a question, and being able to hop right to it, and it jumps right to that specific point on the YouTube video is magical. So
wonderful.
Thank you every day for
actually, gotta add props to Chris P, because it's a lot of back end stuff now, which is really great. And in fact, on Saturday, I was doing it the old school way because I didn't know how this was going to react with the questions, and then I called up what he did for a script, and his times were set up better than mine. So I'm going to trust that today. We'll see what happens.
Awesome. All right, Bill, can we get the next one?
Well, we can, but I have to again apologize to John. I messed that up because I was so fascinated with the fish behind you. So it was entirely my fault. So moving on to Rupert McRae from Dallas, Texas, who is back with a Zoom business account. You're able to customize your Zoom URL, like your company name .zoom.us, and upload custom HTML for your login page. Has anyone seen any companies doing a great job with this?
Where's the cricket sound effect? All right, Jonas, go for it, and then Rupert.
The only great thing I have seen is we have companies in Germany that are providing GDPR compliant Zoom experiences over that way, because they basically are using the meeting connector hosted in German clouds, and then using the vanity URL, and they design it quite a bit, but nothing amazing, just the use is good.
Yeah, I've just been trying to look for examples. Funny enough, if you Google like site : Zoom US, it'll come up with like all the Zoom login pages that Google has indexed, and there's all kinds of examples out there. Some people have like single sign-on and all kinds of stuff and instructions and help desk, but I've yet to see like a really good looking one. I just wondered if anybody had seen one.
If you find something, let us know, because I customized ours, but I didn't mess with I just added the vanity URL. I didn't put in any HTML. I saw the page, but I didn't see anything that I'd want to add in there. But yeah, let us know. Circle back if you can, if you find something cool. All right, next question.
Hasmuk, our friend from Cape Town, South Africa, says, has ATEM questions. ATEM controlled by my staff, and he wants to access the ATEM from another desktop. The ATEM is on a fixed IP. If he inserts the ATEM IP address in the URL bar, nothing happens. And he wants to know what he's missing. Does the second machine need ATEM software, or has he got something all wrong?
Jonas, and then Karl.
So you can't access the ATEM over HTTP, which is the protocol your browser uses. You need the ATEM software control and stay installed on the second device, and then you can put in the static IP address into there by connecting, or you can use any third-party controller that works with an ATEM. But sadly, the ATEM doesn't have a web interface.
Yeah, go ahead, Karl.
Yeah, exactly as Jonas said. So there's no web interface for the ATEM, so it is software. But in the software, you can actually set up in settings the IP address of that ATEM.
Yeah, we'll typically use a couple machines. So we just install the software, and then we'll have, let's say, a graphics operator having the media pool, and then we'll have another person looking at audio, another person running color correction. They're all on different machines, all in different browsers. And then we'll even throw in those apps like Mix Effect or Strata that we can control as well with a touch screen on an iPad. Mark Giuliani.
So Blackmagic Design has an ATEM setup software, which will go out to your network and find all the different ATEM switchers that you have, and then you can just pick which ones you want to connect to.
Yeah, Nigel?
Yeah, Mix Effect runs on my M1 Mac, so that would be a great way without having to have the software on it.
Nice. Yeah, I'm running a mix effect on my Mac too. It seems to be on the M1. It seems to be working really well. And yeah, you can have multiple ATEMs with multiple IP addresses. You just got to manually assign them. All right. It looks like we beat that one pretty good. Next question.
Roberto Barro of Plymouth Meeting, Pennsylvania says, how do I see the multi-view on my iPhone? I'm only seeing the pinned panelist. What am I doing wrong? I guess he wants to get the gallery view.
Go ahead, Rupert.
I don't know that you're doing anything wrong. In my experience, the gallery experience on an iPhone and on an Android, for that matter, is less than satisfactory. Doesn't really seem to have a whole lot of logic, but you really just do have to scroll through. I think the first swipe is always going to be the active speaker, then you get some kind of gallery, and then it's just a mess.
Go ahead, Carl.
If I'm correct, I believe that on the phones, iPhone and Android, it's 4 up for the gallery view and just swipe left. On the iPad, it's 9 up, if I'm correct. And on desktop, it's 25 or 49.
Yeah, and if he's watching this webinar right now, it's being controlled by Jesse. So in a webinar, you will see whatever he wants you to see. So if he says he wants you to see a spotlight of somebody in particular or active speaker, like I'm active speaker right now, so I'll be full screen. And then Jesse, you want to cut to gallery just to let everybody see what that looks like in webinar, and then go ahead and take it, Jesse.
So just one minor detail. If you're using an iPad in gallery view, you get a grid of 25 people.
Alrighty. Hopefully that answers your question, Roberto. Or Roscoe, you got something to add?
Or much less if you're using an iPad mini. So.
All right, next question.
Moving on, this comes from Alex Forney Goldner, our friend in London, and he says Andrew Cross of Vizrt has talked about the forthcoming NDI version 5 having, quote, native Final Cut Pro support. What will this mean?
Jonas.
If you look how they integrate it into Premiere, it probably means that there will be a plugin that allows you to play out to NDI. What they want people to use it for is, for example, playing out lower thirds via that. Doug Johnson is doing that via Premiere, but it's also good for if you want to blow up the editing screen for a client, you can, for example, use a Bird Dog Play device that will come out with NDI 5, and then the client could be at the other side of the world and just see it over that device, which is quite nice.
Yeah, and then there's software that's coming out or is out that allows you to stream. There's one called Looper that's in beta right now. There's stuff like Frame.io where, yeah, you kick it out, NDI, and then it'll go over to SRT or a WebRTC client, and then people can be on the other side of the planet or just on the other side of the wall and seeing your output and making decisions with you. Next question. Or Bill, did you want to add on to that?
Well, I just noted that I do screen sharing a lot with clients, and it's very easy to just drag my normal Final Cut display onto that, and it goes directly out and they can watch it. So it doesn't have to be particularly complicated. I do a good bit of this, but I suppose like with many things in Final Cut, there's lots of different ways to get this output out to people. So let's move on. Moving on to Rupert McCrae, and Rupert McCrae in Dallas, Texas. This next question is, I'm considering a fixed hardwired backup generator for the house to cover at least the essential circuits, meaning my office and studio. Auto start, auto transfer switch, UPS for holdover. Any experiences with such a project?
Roscoe Jones.
I was back in Indiana. That's all my father-in-law, Generac. Generac just is the best, I guess, out there. And he was putting in the concrete and pulling he needed a 2-inch gas line. That was the one thing he didn't expect, is that you needed to pull in a much larger gas line than what a house can feed for that generator when it kicks on. So I can give you lots of information if you want to talk to my father-in-law.
Mark Giuliani.
And Generac also now has a kind of like a hybrid system that uses the batteries and solar energy to repower batteries.
Go ahead, Nigel.
Yeah, we sell a system from RacePoint, which is owned by Savant, and what they're focused on a lot is building microgrids. And if you actually search for microgrids online, you find a really good set of information about how to integrate all of this together.
Alrighty, next question.
Hasmuk's back. This time Hasmuk says, can the panel provide a rookie's guide to setting up a Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 6K as a webcam? What do I need to keep top of mind in the settings menu? Explain the selected option and compare the others, for example, RAW versus ProRes and so forth.
Carl.
So as far as RAW and ProRes, as far as streaming, like what we're doing, you're going to want to make sure that you're probably in RAW, so you can do full aperture. So it's going to be the 6K version of RAW. It will only go to a maximum of 50 frames a second, so you want to set it to 30 frames a second. It won't do 60 at full aperture. You get little black bars at top and bottom. If you try to go to 60 frames a second, it'll pop you into another resolution. So 30 frames a second at the full aperture. That way you'll get the full screen without black bars. It's up to you if you want to use video or video extended as far as your color profile. It's up to you how you want to do the LUTs. So there's a long road there, but you don't need to worry about if you're streaming out, which is 1080 out of the camera. It's just set it in 6K and set it at 30 frames a second. That'd be the first thing I would do.
Yeah, and if somebody makes a rookie's guide, it'd be great to throw it in Discord or have an area in Discord where we can put this stuff in. I think we only have a 50 meg limit or so on Discord because we're at level 2, but it should be enough to make a really short video. Or it's just like these answers here, right? They should just be concise and to the point. Mark, then Jonas, then Sky.
For whatever reason, I've had better luck with a USB-C cable connecting it to the computer than a Thunderbolt cable.
Interesting. Jonas?
Yeah, and that could also be a nice little video on the upcoming YouTube channel, since I know that's something that Alex planned, like small, concise tutorials. Yeah, that would be amazing because there are a lot of quirks with the Blackmagic cameras where you try a lot and then suddenly you realize, oh, it was set to 4K and it's not outputting 1080p on that input. I just spent half an hour replacing cables for nothing.
Yeah, it'd be nice. I think that's what we're here to do is learn, share information. So we save somebody half an hour and some heartache tearing out their hair. I see Carl already tore out all his hair. So we don't be like Carl. Sky, then Jesse.
Sorry, I was being enthusiastic and I'm looking forward to hearing Nigel's answer.
Yeah, Nigel, go ahead. I didn't have a comment on the previous question, just to correct something.
Okay. So I had this problem. I got a new 6K Pro and I could not get rid of those black bars. And it goes from an HDMI cable into my Extreme and then a USB-C into my computer. And Beiju actually gave me the answer, and I'm happy to copy it into the Discord. It almost makes no sense, but you have to go through a bizarre set of steps, including backwards and forwards between LUT styles and settings, and it felt like it was some scientific dance I had to do, and I followed these 3 steps. I put it in my Kana, and now it does anything I want it to. It was just a strange combination of keys.
Just with the black bars, I know when I was setting up my Blackmagic 6K, Guy and some of the other people were helpful in telling me that some of the resolution settings, like if you pick 4K, there's a lot of different very close to 4K resolution settings, and some of those will letterbox it and others won't. So I don't know off the top of my head what the right one was, but I'm sure someone here could post that. So since we're holding ourselves accountable today, I wanted to make a correction about what I said about the iPad gallery view. It's not 25, it's 20 that you can do, because it's 4 across and 5 down. I just counted one direction, assuming it was the same in the other direction, but it's not. It's 4, it's 20 views in the gallery view on the iPad. And I was trying, because right now I'm using my iPad to monitor the gallery in case we need to spotlight somebody. And we don't have more than 14, 15 people live, even though we have a much larger group as participants. So I don't know what happens when we exceed 20, but I'm guessing it's not going to give me another row in here. It's going to actually make me have to scroll to a second page. But I was trying to get the definitive answer because Carl said 9, I said 25, and I don't know for sure it's 20. So I looked it up on the internet, and I was finding something that says the iPhone will show 4, which was said correctly. The iPad will show 9, which is what Carl said. So they must have recently changed that since all the stuff on the web has been published to increase the number.
Do you have an iPad Pro or an iPad, Jesse?
I have the iPad Pro, not the M1, but the one with the LiDAR.
That's a little different then. Yeah, so the iPad Pro, I think, gets just a different kind of build of zoom. Maybe. I think you're right.
Interesting. And I wonder if the 12.9 gets more than the 10, because I've got the 10.
Interesting. And I love that some of the participants are also correcting. If you find something where you want to check us and throw it in Mukana, we'll bring it back up. And because there's a lot of people that do listen to this while they're doing other things and they're not reading Mukana, so they're off working. And so if there's something that needs to be corrected, either we can do it on the fly within minutes or in the next episode as we are today. Let's go ahead and move on and grab the next question, Bill.
Sure. And he asked, can Jesse Schwartz run us through how he used the xrite color, USA color, everywhere else it's a color, oh, it's the spelling, to shade his Blackmagic camera 6K color camera?
Jesse, you're muted.
Sorry. I was wondering why it wasn't coming to me, because I was talking and usually Zoom will auto switch to the person talking. So I didn't buy the xrite that Charles recommended. I bought the budget card that costs $50. This one is the Spider Checker 24. And I did buy it so that Karl, he has been generous enough to volunteer to help me create a LUT for my camera. Right now, I'm not using the Blackmagic 6K. I'm using a Sony RX100 Model 3. It's about a 6-year-old camera, but it's got a 1-inch sensor, so I'm able to get some background blur. And I like the cool tint, even though I can see from the gallery view I'm much cooler in color temperature than the rest of the group. So maybe that's not so great, but I haven't yet. So Karl did create a color cube that he sent me back based on me. I sent him a short Zoom video that I recorded of my own meeting, holding this card up, and then I flipped it like this. And he sent me back something which was an image of what he was seeing. He's got, all being a professional colorist, the correct monitors. So what he's seeing is what the target is. So he did that for my Sony. The problem with the Sony RX100 is that it doesn't accept LUTs. And the only way I can change things is to go off of, I'm on a movie capture mode on the camera. I do have manual focus, but everything else like exposure control, it does itself automatically. And throughout the day with my window here, I'm in what you'd call like a dynamic lighting situation. It's kind of a lost cause for me to ever balance this Sony camera out. Now, at some point when we bring the show up to what we're calling Office Hours 2.0, I'll probably switch out and put the Blackmagic in. And then I'm going to need to do the custom LUT and again, engage Karl to do it. But so that's my story to date.
And some of you that might have missed the pre-show, Alex was talking a bit about how he matches multiple cameras. And I could say that when you get it dialed in, and you see this on major broadcast TV every day, it's so seamless. Like, it shouldn't be jarring. And this is the thing that happens when you use two different manufacturer types of cameras, where there's a jump that's distinguishable. And that might be okay if you're doing like an overhead shot in a cooking show. But when it's the same talent and they're walk and talk, it's a jarring. So hopefully you can get this dialed in. Hopefully you can use some tools, because scopes are really where it's at for this. Roscoe, you want to take it?
Well, real quick, DaVinci Resolve actually has built into it specific layouts of xrite. So you may want to go into Resolve first, check that you get if you're going to get into this, check that you buy the correct layout. Once you do a recording and you put that exact layout on your recording, Resolve will see that, and it will then in Resolve do all the coloring to match that camera to what it knows that xrite should look like. And it will then, you take that and export that as a cube back to the camera, so that your camera now also sees the world in the correct sense. I hope that made, but the tutorial link is in Mukana.
Awesome. And I guess there's a live version. I haven't tried it yet, but I guess there's a way of using some kind of Blackmagic capture device or export device to feed it all the way through. Nigel?
Yeah, I think the live version requires SDI. So,
SDI, okay.
Yeah, but I use the Color Checker Passport Pro, works fine.
And Jonas, you want to wrap it up?
Solve Live works with the Ultra Studio 3G. That's where you can
Ultra
feed it in.
Studio 3G, the little guy. Cool. All right, next question, Bill.
Jasmine Lee in Singapore says, I'm thinking of upgrading from a Logitech C922 to a Canon EOS M50 Mk with kit lens. Any options on this camera, or there's something else in the same price category I should consider, mainly used for online meetings?
Go ahead, Carl.
So yeah, if you're using this as a webcam, it's one of the best webcams at that price. The lens isn't anything to write home to about in regards to photography, but if you're doing HD 2 megapixel webcam, perfectly fine, that lens. You probably want to go a bit tighter in that lens, so around the 35 to 50 millimeter range for webcam. To tighten up your view, you'll get a bit of bokeh with that lens as well. Not a lot, but you get a bit. That camera is quite amazing as far as what it can output. The version, they did a massive upgrade between the version 1 and version 2. It can output 4K from HDMI. It's one of the few cameras under $1,000 that will do 4K at HDMI that has interchangeable lens. It does very clean 1080. The 1080 is a full sensor. The 4K is pixel to pixel accurate, so which means it's a tiny bit of a crop if you use the 4K output if you choose to. But it is, it's quite an amazing camera for vlogging. It was designed for vlogging, and you can actually flip the screen around so you can see yourself as well.
And Carl, on that camera, does it have via Canon software a way to just connect via USB direct, or you still need to go through a capture
so
card?
You can control that. You control the whole camera from a laptop if you want. So you can actually, it has the Camera Connect software. So the Canon Camera Connect software, CCC.
Jonas?
I would still use a Cam Link with it. That's because what I have seen, the USB connection or the USB out of the cameras into as a webcam, they are not as good as if you invest €100 for Link. Especially since the new one can 4K. So if we upgrade Zoom to 4K, you're already there.
HDMI is the best out of that camera.
I'd also look at this little guy. It's the Panasonic G100, I believe it is. It is in that same price point, micro four thirds with an interchangeable lens and a flip around screen. So if you're doing the shopping, compare those two. Next question.
Next question comes to us from Jonas Dattel of Reutlingen, Germany, here on the panel today. And Jonas says, what was John Barker's reason to produce last week's Show in the Cloud versus locally?
John, take it.
Yeah, I didn't plant this question, just so you know. First of all, just to show you real quickly what my live stream last week looked like. I had Aaron Parecki on, and I was building his PK1 Extreme stand. So you can see that in the middle here, and then you can see me up on the side and him on the other side. But the challenge was that, as I explained when I was on doing a second hour a while back, sending 2 feeds out of my house is not so easy on 4G. And I didn't want to bring Aaron into the house and then send him and my cameras out. I was a little bit worried about bandwidth. So instead, I sent a couple of low quality feeds up to AWS, and then Aaron was going into AWS too. And then Jonas was mixing the show for us up there. So it was the first time sort of hands off for me building. Well, I was hands on building, but hands off mixing the show. So the main reason was I didn't want to bring in the data and send the data out of the house here. And actually, if my feed completely died, Jonas plus Aaron could still sort of vamp while I tried to troubleshoot on my end. So we had lots of stuff. I was on Zoom, I was on SRT just to make sure everything worked just fine. So it was just in case sort of situation.
Wow. And then Jonas, you want to tell us a little bit about the production of how you did it?
It was a pretty simple vMix setup in the cloud. We had one instance for vMix, one for Zoom. We used SRT for John Barker's main shoot, and Aaron Parecki also sent in an SRT. And then we had...
How are they coming in, SRT?
Via software or two SRTs from Pearl Nano. I think you both used Pearl Nanos. And then they also looped Zoom. So we had a backup for both of those. So if the SRT would go down, I could have switched to Zoom, and we interconnected 2 Zoom meetings via virtual audio cable. So I got the audio from both. Then I also spoke into those meetings as the producer.
Now, for people at home that may not be familiar with why you would do that, why would you send up 2 feeds? What's the difference between SRT and Zoom?
Well, for one, I would have loved for John to be able to send 2 high-quality SRT feeds, but we couldn't manage to convince his internet to let us do that. So we used a low quality Zoom feed because Zoom's algorithm to compress a video is very good. And also the Zoom was used for the for low latency communication between those two. So they could hear themselves in about 300 to 400 milliseconds, which is better for a conversation than to have to wait 1 or 2 seconds till the SRT is down again.
Gotcha. And is there a link? Hopefully somebody put a link in Mukana so we can go back and watch. Is there a specific spot maybe where people can look and see the difference between the shots so we know what you're talking about? Is there a difference between the Zoom and the SRT feed?
I think if you compare the start, we made it extra complicated. We did the start with John Barker in his main shot via SRT, then had a small video playing, and then you will see that we switched. SRT was then the main feed, and his feed in the top right was then Zoom. So you will see the difference in there. And also the post-show was done in Zoom.
Awesome. All right. Any last words, John, before we move on to the next question? How'd it come out?
Just to say, I know we all know this, but Jonas is literally the best. He spent a few hours of last Monday helping me set this all up in the cloud, and all he got was a pat on the back and a thanks. So, I mean, I know we all know it, but big thanks to him for helping me make it happen.
Nice. Right on, Jonas. All right, next question.
Well, and John Barker's not getting off that easy because Hasmuk's next question from Cape Town, South Africa is for you as well. And it is, John Barker found H2R gear extremely useful. Thanks, Jonas, for pointing it out. John, are you leaving the preloaded and user contributed gear as open as it is? Much of the gear I had to create was not all inputs, outputs were comprehensive in the library. So I guess he's looking for your development path.
Yeah, John, take it.
Sure. Yeah, just as a refresher, H2R gear is something I showed off on that second hour before, which was for planning your equipment and drawing cables and stuff. And there is a community library within that, so you don't have to create everything from scratch. My ultimate goal is that, and I'm already doing this, where I'm approving or sort of rejecting things that are duplicates or not quite accurate. So I'm kind of working my way through that at the minute. As a peek behind the curtain, I have 450 items ahead of me to either approve or reject. So I'm slowly making my way there. And on the other side, in the plan, I have some cool features coming up soon, which would let you take an item and customize it fully within the plan, or even just build an item completely within the plan. So plenty of features coming soon. So thanks, Hasmuk, for the question.
That's awesome. Yeah, yesterday there was a question regarding this, and a lot of us talked about Draw.io and OmniGraffle and these tools that we used to use, but then yours just makes it so wonderful when all those pieces are already preloaded in there. We don't have to redraw them. It's just super fast. So thank you for creating an awesome piece of software. And it's free still, or is it paid?
For the next, I wasn't ready to say this just yet, but for the next week or two, it is very, very affordable. And then it will be quite affordable after that.
Awesome. Thanks for that. All right, next question.
Eric Price in Leavenworth, Kansas has a question for me. It looks like Bill Davis's video looks much better after the problems noted last week. Can Bill talk us through what the solution ultimately was? Was it lighting or something else? And like most of the cases, it is a little bit of everything else. One thing I didn't realize that had happened to me, most of you know that Blackmagic cameras are dual native ISO, and somehow my native ISO had slipped down into the range where it was adding a lot of gain because it was set at the lower level rather than the higher where I had wanted it originally. I had, in doing all my different presets and trying to get a decent looking picture on screen, I had increased that gain essentially past where it should have been. So I lowered all that back out of it and then added more light into the picture. And those two things probably made the biggest difference in upping the quality, particularly of that noise that was on the background. So hopefully it's good enough.
Thanks, Bill, for following up with that, and for Eric for the question, because I mean that's how we're learning here. And like Hasmuk was saying earlier, if there was a 101 course, I'm wondering if that would have found it, because it probably would have been right in whoever makes it, a little tutorial is check your ISO right off the bat.
Yeah, I wonder, that we're talking about, hey, can you make it or can you make it? That might be a good little team project that somebody writes the basic script. It goes to a couple of people who can add their thoughts, and the team can get together on Zoom very quickly, figure out the top 10 things. If you want somebody to narrate it, I'll be happy to do the voiceover for it. And then somebody else or me or whomever can edit the right scenes to it. And we might end up with the kind of the wisdom of everyone rather than one individual solving it through the lens of the problems that they are familiar with.
Awesome. I think that's a great idea. Carl?
Yeah, so I think maybe with the next video ruthless review, if you could say what your camera settings are, just very basic ISO, aperture value, and your shutter speed, or your 180 degrees, whichever one it is. The reason why is because if Bill would have told us that, and we know he's on a Blackmagic camera, and he said anything other than 400 or 3200, would say, hey Bill, you need to be either on 400 or 3200 to get the best live image out of your camera without, because you're not raw processing. So yeah, because if you're not on one of those two, it's going to degrade your image really quickly. And also by letting us know those three things, someone like me can tell quickly what your EV is. So my EV in this room is 7. A lot of people's EV in their rooms may be 4 or 3. That are simply just cranking their ISO. My ISO is 100. So I don't know how many people have an ISO of 100 right now, but mine is 100. That's the lowest a camera can be because I'm on a digital SLR. So if I keep on adding ISO onto this particular camera, it'll just keep on adding grain. At 100, it's got the best dynamic range. Anyway, so if we just know those three things, the next time we do a video ruthless review, then we can pinpoint. I can pinpoint, and some other people on the panel can pinpoint errors really quickly because it will tell us one of those settings may just be off. If you're on a webcam, a little bit harder.
Alrighty, next question. Thank you.
Sorry,
Bill,
I'm backwards. Yeah, Jasmine Lee is up next in Singapore. Is there a way to add a Zoom webinar, an NDA that attendees have to agree to? So I guess he wants a gatekeeper NDA before they are allowed to join the session.
Rupert and then Carl.
So NDAs are going to be a kind of sensitive area, but on the back end of Zoom, you can show a disclaimer that people will have to read before they join a meeting. Not exactly what you want, but you can maybe could look at that. Or if you're running a meeting or a webinar that requires the user to register in the first place, then you may be able to include some text or some language in there that covers what you want. On Zoom, may actually have some capabilities for this, or in the future Zoom events. But remember that I'm not sure whether Zoom would really want to be involved in you and your client negotiating a contract. And depending on the level of IP you're trying to protect, you may want something more robust than anything that Zoom had to offer anyway. Whichever way you could do it, you could have at the beginning of your event, your announcer or your host or whatever could just remind everybody that by joining and by continuing, they have agreed to the NDA in whatever way you've set it up.
Carl, then Jonas, then Bill.
NDAs are only applicable in the country they're signed in. So I can't be forced to sign an NDA for an American company. So it's not going to happen.
Interesting. Jonas?
What you might want to look into there is the name flew me, but there's a specific feature in Zoom that can allow you to prevent people from group A talking to group B. And it's actually enforced down to the breakout room. So those people can't be in the same meeting and can't hear each other then. So that might be something that you also want to look into if you need confidential work on Zoom.
All right, Bill.
Yeah, I was going to reflect basically what Carl said. You got to remember that if we're in the US, we're under Title 17, the Copyright Act that only deals in America. Each jurisdiction has their own set of laws. And unfortunately or fortunately, we are in a global communications environment now. So my rule is if you don't want somebody to steal it, don't put it up anywhere. Keep it on your machine. All the legalese in the world isn't going to keep somebody in another country from grabbing your work and throwing it out. It's just how it works.
All righty, next question.
Laura
or
Thompson.
Jeffrey, hold on, just before that, Jeffrey, did you have something to say?
Oh, I just wanted to say with NDAs, if you still want to work with the company, you sign the NDA. It's simple as that. And if it's an easy way for you to lose all respect and dignity by burning bridges with different companies, even though it's not enforced in your country, you still enforce NDA.
Got it. Bill, let's go ahead and take the next one.
Laura
Yeah.
Thompson's up next with from Texas. Within the beginning, when office hours had used the Zoom tools for questions, do I remember correctly that if a panelist wants to ask a question, they have to do so before joining the panel? I'm trying to remember back. Was that a part of things?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember as well. Jesse?
I don't think we had to ask it before. It was just always encouraged to get your questions in early.
I think what Alex said at one point was don't just do them verbally, put them in the discussion thing so that.
Yeah, that was always the
can
big
read it.
thing, is that us as panelists are supposed to have no more access to steering the conversation than the producers. So anything we want to talk about needs to be voted up and down by putting it into the Q&A system.
Okay, Roscoe, then Jonas.
Yeah, this has come up because of Tony's show. Panelists are not able to ask questions in the Q&A tool inside of Zoom.
There you go. Next.
Yeah, exactly.
Jonas?
That's what
Okay.
I wanted to say. That was before we changed to Mukana, there was always this process of putting in your question into the FAQ thing before you join the panel, because otherwise you would need to drop down, ask a question, go up again, which would get very confusing for the people letting people in.
And then I know that Leo used another tool called sly.do for his show. I've been a panelist on there, and that seems to be pretty helpful for that. Do you know what AV Tech Talk? Anybody know what AV Tech Talks is using? I think they're just using Facebook and having somebody pull them from Facebook. All right, let's go ahead and move on to the next one.
Laura Thompson's finished, so we're moving on to the seventh scroll in Brooklyn again. And morning, guys. Any update on the monoprice 8x8 HDMI matrix? Is it worth it or not?
All right, Carl, let us know.
So a matrix is a tool, and it's like, do you need a bandsaw or do you need like a circular saw? So the matrix is many to one or one to many or a group to some, and it depends how you want to use that tool. It's not a switcher in a way. It can be used as a crude switcher in like a place of worship where you may have multiple screens in multiple rooms. So one person can stream into or stream a video into all those rooms, or you can stream a lot of things into one room. So it's kind of a router more than what it is. It's kind of like in networking, it's like a networking switch. It is a router. It does what it does. It doesn't take the place of an ATEM. So you could look at it and go, oh, it could be used as an ATEM, but the monoprice one is like $850 or $1,000, depending on which flavor you want. It's a lot more expensive than an ATEM, and an ATEM is a lot more capable when it comes to switching. But it's essentially it's a utility tool for moving one HDMI to many HDMI, or moving many HDMI into one HDMI, or somewhere in between. It's not really a product you can build a show on, let's say.
And then, Carl, on those matrices, do you know if it locks that EDI signal when you first sync, or does it happen to glitch? Well, I'm sure there's a frame or two when it switches, but is there any
they're
kind of
not
resync?
frame accurate. No, they're not frame accurate. You can't really use them. There are more like Geffen does have ones that are frame accurate. They're like 4 or 5 times the price as monoprice. Monoprice is just really you would see them in retailers. So retailers that want to run one image onto many screens into that retail space. Monoprice would be the perfect one to use for that, because they're never changing the signal. They open up their store, they start running the matrix, and then they shut down the store and they turn off the matrix at the end of the day. It can be programmed via Ethernet, so it does have an Ethernet port to program what port goes to where via computer software, but it's not as smooth as an ATEM. So an ATEM Extreme for I think $1,000 US has 8 in and 2 out. Is a far more valuable machine than the matrix. But the matrix is a tool. If you know you need to have 8 in, 8 out, and you need that flexibility, then that's what it's for. But generally, you would set it up before your show. Even the Blackmagic ones don't sync. So the Blackmagic routers don't sync unless you get the clear vid one. There's a clear video one that does sync as it comes in, but the rest of them, like the 40x40, doesn't sync all the videos together into frame locking, essentially.
All right. Hopefully that answers your question, Mike, at 7 Scroll. Let's go on to the next question.
Okay, Hasmukh is up next, and Hasmukh again says, "I get ready he's getting ready to get a second Blackmagic 6K, and he asks, why should I not get the 6K Pro?"
Carl?
I would simply just say this quickly as a test. If the camera is not going outside, if the camera is not going to be handheld in like a gimbal, and if essentially if the camera is always going to be on a tripod inside live streaming, then the 6K vanilla is the best because you won't need the ND filters, you won't need the brighter screen, you won't need the added battery because it's always going to be running off power. So those things are really good if you take the camera outside and you're in like a video production, run and gun production. Run and gun is an amazing camera, but for non-run and gun services like what we do in office hours, and for live shows where you have access to power and you're not in blinding sunlight, let's put it that way, then the 6K vanilla is perfect.
Jesse and then Bill.
Yeah, Carl nailed it. Having bought the 6K before the 6K Pro came out, I would definitely have bought the 6K Pro because I don't use it a lot as a studio camera. Maybe I will more in the future, but taking the regular 6K outside, like me trying to use it to film my kids, it's really difficult between the screen not articulating, between the it's only 500 nits on the non-pro, and I think the pro is at 1,000 nits. So I had to buy an external monitor to try and compensate for that, which already put me at the price of the pro. So definitely go pro if you have any ideas of going outside with it and running and gunning kind of thing.
Bill Davis. Muted.
Oops.
Bill.
Yeah, sorry, I'm trying to get used to this new mute process. If you're going to be using it as a studio camera too, the Pro has some upgrades. Particularly, it's got an electronic viewfinder that you can buy as an additional add-on, and that can be helpful when you're in a studio situation. And it also has mini XLR inputs instead of that odd connector, so that's a little more standard. Basically, I think if you don't want to configure and you want more flexibility, I think the original one has a little more flexibility. You're paying extra for a lot of these things, particularly the bigger L batteries, I think is a big deal because the 6Ks are pretty power hungry, and the regular Canon E6 batteries or whatever they're called, LP6, they don't run 6K for a very long time. So
yeah, you'll get 15 minutes of time before your camera will shut down.
So if you have a power supply, shore power, if you're on shore power, it's not a big deal. If you're not, that alone might be the difference. So they're just subtle differences depending on how you shoot.
Yeah, Jeffrey, you want to take it home?
Yeah, Hazmak, you're part of the panel. You know better. You should be selling that 6K and buying 2 Pros out of the whole thing. And the big thing is, we were talking about color matching cameras, and sometimes even if you take that step up to the next camera, new firmware, new features, and of course that can be problematic trying to match that color as well. Even though Blackmagic does a great job in doing color variants from there, but yeah, just get the Pro, you'll be fine.
Alrighty, let's move on to the next one.
Sky Gleason's up next from from Seattle. Why am I saying Chicago? When is this week's Zoom update? Who's going to do it and what is expected? The weekly updates?
It's cooler in Chicago? I don't know.
Nobody's raising their hand. Let's see, Rupert and Jonas are this morning. Jesse and then Jeff.
Because I'm not on the latest version of Zoom, I volunteered an update to the next update, and we'll see what happens to my system.
And Jeffrey?
I updated this morning, said bug fixes. That was pretty much it. At least Windows side.
Sky?
And it goes to 7. Is that what I understand? And John Edelson is saying it's going to be several new features. So I was curious what those new features might be.
Roscoe.
Well, I think John was hinting that the NDI might be the feature that possibly would come. That's what I think everyone's waiting for.
Yeah, I believe that there was some public, if you go to the Zoom change log, you can see some stuff in there that says some stuff. Somebody could put a link in there. It talks about NDI and production environments. Next question.
Liberty White, our friend says from Atlanta says, what are your preferred apps for talent release forms? Sure, you can use Adobe, but are there other apps that you trust?
Bill Davis.
I was looking around for my phone because I'm trying to remember the names of the ones. I have 2 talent release forms. The question is, how do you want to manage your forms? You can keep them on the device a lot of these now want you to subscribe and have a management system behind them so that you're doing releases. It really depends on, do you just want to execute them, have somebody scroll on your phone, which they all do, and then save them all, print them out when you get back and send them to whomever? Or do you want to create kind of an interactive release management service where they live in the cloud and people can access them and things like that? There's a lot of apps out there. I will say that they're all generic, and if you can't change them for your particular circumstance, I'd look askance at that. And also, we should probably always disclaim this is a legal document, a talent release or anything else, and it could end up in court. So make sure that if you're doing a particular kind of work, you run it through any entertainment professionals, lawyers, and things like that. They're going to be looking out for your interests rather than what the original big company thought was important.
And Rupert.
So personally, I always go to DocuSign for any kind of e-signature and stuff like that. The biggest concern, I mean, I have when it comes to that kind of thing is you want to bear in mind what they call non-repudiation, which is that the person signing your document, there should be no way later that they could deny that they signed it or that that was their signature. And with a lot of these little apps out there, you could go into court, like Bill says, and it's just not enforceable. You could say, I didn't sign that. You've got no track record of it. Then there's no audit trail. You know, you need some kind of system that's going to take care of all of that for you. And as far as I'm concerned, DocuSign is the leader in that space.
Awesome. Next question, Bill.
Moving on, Liberty White just finished, or no, has another one. For the M1 Mac Mini users, what peripheral devices or software do you wish you had early on to improve your workflow?
Go ahead, Carl. You're muted, Carl. We missed that one.
The 6K display, XDR display would be nice because it does work on the. You can add one of those and a 4K. So you can have
Why
6K and
one?
4K.
Why stop at one, Carl?
You
Come
can
on.
only support. It only supports one. It only supports one.
Oh, really? Oh, it's so
it supports
huge.
one 6K and one. So you can have two monitors, but it only supports one 6K and one 4K. If you do that,
so you need the Pro. You need a Mac
You
Pro.
need the Pro, and then you need to go buy yourself an LG 4K or something.
You need to take a second mortgage out to get all that. I saw Adam Tao had one the other day. I actually walked into the Apple store here in Bellevue and saw it for the first time, and I was drooling. I mean, it's gorgeous. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, on a job I can't talk about, I had access to one and I worked on it for 2 weeks. They're pretty amazing. It's a gorgeous, gorgeous display. I will say that there were still things that were hard to see, even on the magnificent of that display. I do think even the highest level displays calibrated correctly in certain circumstances can still be, what's the right word for it? Not imperfect, but you still have to train yourself to know what to look for. So that people like Charles, who are colorists, it's not just their equipment, it's how they train their eyes and their thinking to look for things that can be a problem and then notice them and be able to fix them. So I just, I don't want to give everybody the idea that if you just go out and spend all that money, all your problems are going to go away. You still need to do the training, I think, to be good at analyzing the display. My 2 cents.
Nice. And then hooked up to my Mac Mini M1, I have the CalDigit hub, which seems to be working great. I also have a Stream Deck, which I would say that's a must-have peripheral. I have mine with a pop socket, so I can quickly do things like switching and muting. So I would say that. And then I have a huge RAID hooked up, but it's so much louder than the Mac Mini is like dead silent when I plug in my RAID. Unless I'm editing, I have to turn the RAID off. It's just so loud compared to the M1. It's just dead silent. Next question.
Nathan GS in Singapore is next, and he says, thoughts on the Canon XA50 or XA55 for use as a main streaming camera and also as a cam for recording 4K video for other projects. Reasons for looking at this cam for its color science, optical zoom features, and also pro audio inputs.
Yeah, go ahead, Carl.
Yeah, so the XA50 and 55 are pretty much, they're not the top of the line cameras. The 705 and the 405 is top of the line, but at the price they're quite amazing. Their autofocus is something that you can't do with a interchangeable lens camera. So they have manual autofocus until it sees a face. So you'll manual autofocus when it sees a face, it will just take over and do a gradual autofocus. It also has manual to autofocus, so essentially you can manually focus on someone and it won't autofocus quickly. it will just very gradually go to them. So this is what happens when you have a lens and a camera built in one, that you can do these kind of things. It has, so the only difference between the 55 and the 50 is the SDI. So if you're going to do long cable runs, it is an extra $500 US to get the SDI version. There's no other difference between them pretty much. It has Pro Audio, it has the XLR in on the handles. The big thing with this is it's 1080 out of the, even up to 4K recording camera. Outputting it's 1080, but the 1080 is 10-bit 422. So you could do chroma key down the line if you need to as well. So it is very high quality 10-bit going out. So it is it's a video camera. It's not a cinema camera, but because it's a video camera, it has an enormous capabilities in focusing, enormous capabilities in time code. It has time code out as well via HDMI as well. Just the 50 version does have time code via the HDMI. The other thing that it has that many other cameras don't have, especially interchangeable link, it has infrared mode. Now you're thinking, why would you want infrared mode? Infrared mode becomes very handy in certain situations, maybe not for a live streaming event like that, but if you're doing a live streaming out somewhere at night and you're okay doing a black and white feed because you can't add light, so you may be doing a nature walk, then turning your camera to black and white and doing the infrared mode, you can work in almost zero lux as well with those cameras.
Yeah. And as we roll back into doing in-person events and may go back into lockdown, who knows what will happen in the fall. I wanted to get Roscoe's quick interpretation as to why you guys chose PTZ cameras for your new haul instead of something like an XA50, or did you get a couple of those? I remember looking at your diagram.
Well, we have the Pocket 6Ks, so if we need to run in there, we do a couple of events that have 12 different groups in that big concert hall. It's for Christmas, and they're all over the room. But so then we'll run in there with the Pocket 6Ks for that. But otherwise, it really had to do with operators. We weren't going to put, in a nice concert hall, we weren't going to put camera people out there. They can't talk. I mean, in a very quiet concert hall, they cannot be on a headset. And you can't even hear the headset bleed over if you're sitting in the audience nearby. So it was pretty straightforward. Let's go with PTZs in a concert hall.
Awesome. Yeah, something to think about, Nathan, is PTZs for those reasons. Because the Canon XA50, I believe that's a little long in the tooth too, Carl. Is that correct? That one's a little bit older, is it newer?
No, the 40 was the older one. So the 40 is still around. So the 40 and the 45 were the predecessors. Now the 50 and the 55 are the only models essentially until you get to the 405 and the 705, which are the high end.
Gotcha. All righty, next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next, and Douglas says, what connectivity options would you recommend in North America for low latency internet connectivity in rural areas? Do you think Starlink will be a game changer for our industry?
Paul Valhoos.
Yeah, I don't know about Starlink. I ordered it. I haven't received it. I don't know when I'll get it. I don't know, how good it's going to be. I'll find out. And other than that, there's sometimes there's local providers that do wireless internet, and there's other satellite options also. Latency is the big thing you have to evaluate. Back to Bill.
Yeah, over to you, Bill.
Well, latency, I mean, if you've got something that's orbiting the Earth, there's a certain amount of time it takes stuff to get up there and back down. And I don't think anybody can defeat the physics of that. I mean, fiber optic cable to your house that has no copper or anything else between you and the originating thing, I think is always going to be the fastest, lowest latency thing. Sans that for rural areas, because it's going to take a long time for it to get out there. I think these things may be the best we can do, but that doesn't mean it's going to be super fast. That's my 2 cents.
Yeah, I know Douglas says North America, but we got John Barker on the panel who's struggling with this, and he's going to add 2 cents as to how he's doing it with cellular, right?
Correct. It's all based on 4G data here because I can't get fiber. I can't even get old style broadband here because they cut that off up the road as well. So 4G with some antennas on the roof, and I'm using the modem that came with the 4G home package, and it's mostly working okay. I probably get about 20 to 30 down and about 10 to 15 to 20 up on a good day. And it's working pretty well. Although, cut to the previous discussion about Jonas wanting 2 1080p feeds, but otherwise it's working pretty well.
Yeah, and it really depends on the providers too. If you're going to go cellular, I've seen drastic when I've used T-Mobile versus Sprint versus AT&T versus Verizon. Even in a place like Vegas, one will get 100 megabits, and over cellular, it's bananas. And then one will get 5. It's like, what? Which tower are you going to, Carl?
So yeah, something that about Starlink that most people would miss is that the latency is actually lower than what I currently get with my fiber. So I'm getting about 35 milliseconds. Latency on Starlink is anywhere between 18 and maybe 40. So depending, but it's between 18 and 40. So the latency is actually not a problem because the satellites are so low. It's different to all the other internet satellites that have ever been launched. They're all put up in geostationary orbits, which is a long way away. So Forbes just did a review and they found out that the Starlink beta testers right now have faster internet than 95% of Americans, US people in the US. So 95%. There are 5%, of course, people who are on Google Fiber, but 95% of Americans are on slower internet for ping and download speeds than Starlink right now.
Rupert, then Paul.
Sorry, I was having to put some attention elsewhere, so I hope I don't repeat anything. But Starlink have also got recent approval from the FCC to actually bring some of the satellites even to lower orbit. So that's going to help even more with the latency. They are also going to be co-locating some of their ground stations at Google data centers to bring the resources closer to the edge. But also check out the Cisco. Cisco have a new laboratory, a whole new initiative called the Center for Rural Broadband something. I'll put a link in there, but there's a lot of funding out there right now to close the digital divide. So we're definitely going to see some movement in this space.
Paul, bring it home.
Okay, this isn't a contribution as much as a question for John Barker. I've got the AT&T gear all hooked up. It's lit up. I got the flat thing out on my outer wall. What's the last step? Can you go through how you set it up? What the final step is, please?
I wish I could help more. I basically went on the roof I have 2 antennas, one directional and one omnidirectional. And I basically went on the roof with my laptop connected to the router, and it showed signal strength. And I sat there for longer than I want to admit, slowly adjusting it, the directional one, and then playing. So it was like a time killer, really, was my process. I'm sure there's someone else out there that can help you a little more specifically. But in my case, it was a question of time and testing.
Man, that just brought a flashback to when I was a kid, and it was move the antenna. Okay, right there. Now don't move. All right, next question.
Yeah, keep holding it. It's only good while you have your hand on it. I want to watch the ball game.
I was probably the channel changer too. Guy, change the channel.
Georgie Kennedy, our friend from Washington, D.C., is up next. And he said, I'd love to get 1080p of Zoom. How can I convince them I don't need 10 seat of business to do that? Has anyone tried?
Rupert?
I mean, I would say just talk to them about your circumstances, explain to them what you're trying to do, where you're going, where you see it going, and just see what happens. It does not hurt to ask.
Alrighty, next question.
JHB in New York says, it seems networking hardware is required in everything now. Photography, video production, streaming. What is the best and quickest way to gain networking knowledge?
Rupert, then Roscoe.
So a lot of starters in networking will do one of the courses out there. They like the Network Plus from CompTIA. It's a pretty quick and focused course. You can do the material and take the test if you want to, but it's a good curriculum of information. But also just get some equipment, set up a lab, just start breaking stuff and then trying to fix it.
Roscoe and Bill?
The Autonate's Dante training is very good, and it's a great place to start because it will not assume you know anything, and it comes from a media kind of focused background. I don't know how this plays into their new video stuff they've operated, but it'll get you started.
Bill?
My thought is just keep coming to office hours. I was an absolute ignorant idiot about networking stuff before I started here a year ago. I'm still mostly an ignorant idiot about networking stuff, but at least I know the right questions to ask. And if I found myself in a circumstance where I had to talk to somebody about troubleshooting that, at least I would have the language skills now to understand what they're saying when we're trying to work things out. Then once you understand the overarching, you can see if there's an area you want to specialize in, but at least you'll know what you're looking for.
All right, Jeffrey.
Yeah, and it kind of does depend on if you're talking, I'm doing all video versus I'm doing all audio versus photography. Then you can kind of look in the whatever course you're going to take to make sure that they're going to focus on something like Dante for audio or something like NDI for video. Because if you're not gonna use it, why spend a couple weeks learning about it only just because you want to know it or don't even want to know it.
All righty, the next one for Bill.
Liberty's back again, and she's fascinated too with John Barker's experience and says, John Barker, what is your biggest takeaway after your cloud production experience for H2R that Jonas referenced?
One is to trust someone else to mix your show. It's not that I'm precious about it in any way, but just handing over the reins to someone else to do it. I put a lot of confidence in Jonas, and I was right to do it because it worked out really well. But the other thing is explaining cloud production to people I found difficult in general, because it makes so much sense here in the room. I can show an overhead camera and say, connect this cable to that. But explaining the cloud production stuff, I created a thing in H2R Gear to explain it as well, but it's a whole set of terminology that I'm not used to yet. So then to explain that to someone else and get them on board and understanding has been difficult so far.
Yeah, it's amazing what you can do as far as the latency and knowing that you're right up next to the backbone. When you think about that for a second, it is pretty mind-blowing. And then of course the power redundancy, the fast internet, the connectivity, like you're in Europe, but your interviewee, Aaron Parecki, was in Oregon, if I'm correct. So you had two people, but then the data center was, Jonas, where was your data center that you had set up your VPC?
It was all in Ireland.
Ireland. Oh, wow. And how was the hop over for, how was your flight? How was the hop over for Aaron? Was it super fast or a second, or what were we talking?
You mean for Aaron? Aaron, that's the crazy part, because Aaron had fiber and we tested the connection. We actually run with 300 milliseconds delay on the SRT, which meant if we had packet drop, we wouldn't be able to recover. But since his connection was perfect for like the hour of testing, I made the call to not think about it, and it worked amazing.
Wow. Can't wait to see you guys do more of these. And that's the other thing, just like here every day on office hours, we're doing it all the time. So we're getting used to it. I can't wait to see what we can do with some cloud stuff so that we can bang on it and let everybody see that, hey, this works every day. It's not going down. It's what major companies run the internet off of. Citibank, all these big companies use AWS. So I know we can trust it. It's just getting our workflows down. So hopefully we can learn more, and people like John and Jonas and Liberty keep sharing. Next question.
David Brady in New York's up next with, I'm cascading an ATEM Mini into the input 8 of my Extreme primarily for graphics. Is there a way to cascade the control as well? What other ways should I consider in cascading multiple switchers like these?
Carl, go ahead and take it.
This is a question I asked directly to Adam Dow in the post show. I said, can I cascade in Kenny's? So there is a way you can do it kind of manually. So you can have two devices running Mix Effect Pro, so one connected to one connected to the other. You have to remember, you don't want to switch both at the exact same time. So you want to switch the upstream one, so your ATEM Mini first. So if you want to switch the input on that, so let's say you want to go from 1 to 4, change it to 4, and then go to channel 8 on your Extreme if you're going to 8. There is kind of a way you could do it on a computer. In a way, you could run on an M1 computer, you can run Mix Effect Pro on one and then run the actual software, the ATEM software for the ATEM Mini, and then you can have a bit of a this then that, if this then that kind of automation going on between them, because Mix Effect Pro can handle OSC commands. So there is a way to do it. You need to have a time delay because you want one to happen first before. You don't want to switch both at the exact same time. You don't want to switch the one that you're not going to see first and then switch to the one you actually are going to see. So I've thought about this quite a lot, and that's why I posed the question to Adam. There is a way to do it, but it's a bit janky at the moment. Hopefully, maybe if there's any reason for Adam to add it, where you can add multiple ATEMs into one instance of Mix Effect Pro would be good, or the ability to run multiple instances of Mix Effect Pro, and each of those instances are talking to different ATEMs. But you could use a shortcut inside iOS to affect them both at the same time.
Cool. John Barker?
I made a video a while back before the ATEM Mini Extreme Superstore stuff. I was joining two ATEM Mini Pros together to get like a Superstore style effect. And within no time, I was already lost trying to control two. So I switched over to using Companion, which just abstracts that away. And now you can control both of them with one device in front of you. So if you can go that direction instead, I would definitely recommend that. You can get very lost very fast cascading these things together.
Roscoe?
He asked for other ways to connect it. My only other thing is take that ATEM Mini and make it the downstream keyer, which is something I mentioned to Alex the other day. But yeah, the problem is the logic of how the signal flow actually goes is not, on the fly, is not easy to work. So therefore, exactly what John just said, if you can pre-program it and get it all put into a companion so that when you push this button, this is exactly the flow that you'll get. But it's really not an interactive switcher in the way that we think of switchers being used for a live show, in my mind.
All righty, next question.
Aaron Huslidge of Durham, North Carolina. Huslidge, I'm sorry, I keep pronouncing that wrong. Has anyone used Caspar CG for production? I used it last weekend and found it really interesting. Would love to hear from the Office Hours community about that.
No one has any experience with that one?
Well, I don't have experience, but I looked it up because I'd heard the name a few times, and I'm not sure if this is still true. Originally, it was a flash kind of a front end. They may have recoded the whole thing, and it may be more. That would be the only thing. I guess it's used by a lot of broadcasters in Europe. I haven't run across it much here in the U.S.
All right, let's take the next question.
Douglas Carmichael says, I've been looking at the HuddleCam cameras and they look very powerful, as to be very powerful cameras for their price. If I use the HuddleCam Pro IP with NDI as my primary camera, could I convert NDI to a video device to use it with FaceTime and other applications?
Jonas? Jeffrey?
So the short answer, I believe, is no, because you can't do any other cameras into FaceTime. But when they're coming out with a new version of FaceTime where they're going to be spanning it between Android and desktops, in that case, then you might be able to set up an NDI camera through a web browser to make that happen. But of course, things can change just as easily tomorrow to make that happen. But right now, I don't think there is a way.
Yeah, I'll have to double check it. I thought, Carl, do you know?
So on the Mac, you can definitely I use the ATEM as my webcam for FaceTime all the time. So I do a lot of FaceTime calls looking like this. People get freaked out. They're like, how does your little webcam? So yeah, you can. You just need to make sure that when you go to QuickTime, so the way I've always done it, just go to QuickTime, fire up QuickTime. If you can be seen in QuickTime when you go to record mode, then you're fine. That's the exact same camera that FaceTime will see. Now, I am using a Mac Mini, and the thing a Mac Mini doesn't have is a camera. So if you're running a laptop that does have a camera, there may be some code in FaceTime that says ignore all other cameras, use the one that's built in. Mac Minis are headless, so therefore you have to add a camera. And once FaceTime sees you've added a camera, it goes okay. So this works with the Mac Mini. You may want to test it out if you've got a laptop with a webcam built in, to see if it works as well.
There you go. All right, next question.
Liberty White says, following up on Carl's comments on the 6K, how does the 4K stack up for a studio camera for office hours type use cases? It seems like everyone is talking about the 6K on office hours.
Yeah, go ahead, Carl.
So I'll be quick. So the 6K is better in lower light. It gives you better bokeh. It works with the EF lenses. There's a big secondhand market for EF lenses. So that's a tick, tick, tick. I'm a massive fan of the 4K. The reason is it's because it's active micro four thirds mount. It can accept the zoom, powered zoom lenses from Panasonic. So you can actually zoom your lens by sitting, so you can actually change your zoom like a PTZ without the P and the T. But also the the 4K is far less tragic on the batteries, as we discussed before. So it uses the same batteries as the 6K vanilla, but it doesn't screen through those batteries as much. It is a really good camera for the price, I have to admit. If you want to adapt Sony lenses, so if you're in another lens system, then that is the camera for you. If you've got Nikon glass, if you've got Sony glass, if you've got, of course, Olympus and Panasonic glass, it's a no-brainer. And also, if you want to attach that thing to something odd, like a telescope or a microscope, then that's where the 4K wins. It's just a much more flexible camera. It just doesn't have the best bokeh, and it just doesn't have the larger sensor with a lower light.
Roscoe Jones?
Yeah, if you buy it, make sure you get something 2.8 or quicker. You'll find that exactly what Carl just said, that the low light is probably the limitation factor. But if you buy fixed lenses and you get them, fixed lenses, fast fixed lenses are not all that expensive. So that I would say if you're happy to work in a fixed lens world, then it's a great camera.
Bill Davis.
I just want to say this era is astonishing, because considering they lowered the price of the 6K from $2,500 down to $2,000, that used to be the cost of the little monitor thing on top of a broadcast camera that was an accessory. And now to be able to get an entire 6K camera system for that kind of money is insane. We are living in remarkable times in terms of image capture and dealing with technology. It's amazing.
It really is. I remember when I bought my first XL1, I think I paid $5,000 for it. I mean, it came with the lens, but that was a lot of dough for a camera. Now the quality of 6K you can get a couple lenses for that price. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's back again with, when audio and video are being transported via disparate paths, how do you make sure audio and video are properly synced? I know Mimo Live has a video delay option, but would you manage delay in software, hardware, or both?
Go ahead, Carl.
So I was watching some behind the scenes for Formula One. They have these little sync boxes. So essentially they're LED lights that tell you how many frames they are ahead or behind. So when the LED light sweeps across 0, it'll make a beep. And what you see in the video, they're actually doing the sync back at the broadcast center back in the UK, regardless of where the race is. They want to make sure what goes out of broadcast is in sync. And so they will adjust the audio only forward or backwards, and they can tell, because where it goes beep, if it says 4 frames, they notice it'll 4 frames back one way or the other way. So there's these little boxes they put the microphones on. It's very clever. But yes, it's going to be either in software or hardware or both. And it's usually going to be you're moving the audio around either forward or backwards. Generally, you're not going to do too much to the video. It's very rare that the video will come in ahead of the audio, but it could happen depending on your paths. But yeah, so there is sync done. Most of us here have equipment where we can delay the output of our main sources of audio into our USBs, into our USB interfaces. So this is something we can even do ourselves with the equipment we have on office hours.
Go ahead, Bill.
And there's another thing, how you attach audio in can make a difference. In the early days of the Blackmagic 4Ks and 6Ks, we would generally take the XLR adapter that has a mini into the camera, feed our audio through there. Once it's muxed in the camera, it comes out as a synchronized signal. You don't have to mess with it. It was only if you ran audio through a separate circuit versus your video. But even then, I happen to have a lot of low latency equipment now, and I never had a problem from the very beginning with audio and video being out of sync. It just depends on your circumstance.
Alrighty, Roscoe Jones.
Real quick, just VLC has the F and G key, which allows you to put 50 millisecond delay or advance into the audio track. So if you're doing playback, I use it all the time just because I can test the whole system, look on the screen, and play with the keys until I get something that looks good to me.
Alrighty, next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next again, and he says, with the same principles that Victor Cajallo uses to automate the Sunday Sax Jam be applied to production environments like clubs, bars, and smaller independent venues. I could see QLab huddle cams, for example, helping to reduce crew size for video.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Hitting the wrong buttons, so basically it could. There is possibility there. There are some factors that you would have to be in-house to do, like for instance sound. If you ever run sound, you have to run it for the room as well as online, but somebody could definitely be doing a lot of stuff remote video wise. QLab, you're going to have those marks down to a T. for that to happen during the show. Otherwise, you're gonna grossly go out of sync with what you have planned there. But other than that, there is a possibility that it could be done.
Bill Davis.
I was just going to, having done a little of it in my misspent youth, bars and nightclubs and production environment does not go well together in my brain. Typically, the lighting in most of those circumstances make it a real challenge. Now, the cameras have gotten much better. You can get good pictures out of them. They usually are pretty terrible in terms of audio. They're usually rectangular, cheap rooms that have a bar in one corner, and the band is too loud, and it's really hard to get clean audio out of that. If you can get around all that stuff and you can find somebody who is willing to sit there in real time and make creative decisions about it's time to cut to the lead guitarist or back and forth, then you probably can do something. But I think it's going to be a heavy lift because most of those are not hugely profitable organizations. So it's hard to get people who are really qualified to work in those kind of circumstances. Big concert, different subject, but this is for the bar and restaurant kind of crowd.
Go ahead, Courtney, then Rupert.
I just had a crazy idea. I was wondering if anybody has a MIDI-based mixing system that could send out Zoom OSC commands based on the audio signal level coming in from a specific channel. So that if you had a guitar mic or a vocal mic or a sax mic, that it would automatically tell you which is the hottest input signal at the time and switch or whatever the input signal to that channel is and switch or give you a code that you could then instruct the video switcher to switch to a single based on the signal coming in that is the strongest on the channel.
Yeah, actually, that's a great idea, Courtney. Roland does have a switcher that does this. I was on a 24-hour stream reading of the Mueller report, and I didn't want to be there for all 24 hours. It didn't have to be. It was a pro bono gig, so I just went ahead and kicked down the auto switcher, and then there was 3 mics on a panel for people to read it. And just as the person talked hot into that mic, it went ahead and camera switched for me, and I went to bed. Rupert.
I guess you could also think about this in reverse. Bands and performers now have the ability to stream live into these venues. And if those venues get it right, they can have the equipment to send live feedback to wherever those guys are performing from. So it could work in reverse too.
Yeah, I love that, man. The future is so cool. There's other ways that we can do this with software. It's just there's exciting stuff coming. Bill, next question.
John Merrill is next from Phoenix, Arizona. With anyone use Camo Studio Pro Mac OS version, and if so, what do you think of it?
Stumping us. I use the regular Camo. So thanks, Jeffrey. Needed that. John, I guess we don't have anybody on the panel who has the latest version. Maybe somebody in the chat can give us a little update on what they think of it. Next question.
Eric Price, Leavenworth, Kansas, is back. Earlier in the 20s, I used my Nikon 5300 with a capture card to record some classes while waiting for my Brio. Now, when I connect it to the ATEM, it immediately goes from record to playback mode. Any ideas why it doesn't see the ATEM as a capture device?
Go ahead, Carl. That question's kind of funny because I first thought you were talking about the 1920s. Carl, go ahead.
So what it is, it's a setting in your camera. So you need to turn the setting off. So it has CEC control for HDMI. CEC devices, cameras don't like playing with ATEMs. So in your settings, you'll need to go to camera settings, go to HDMI. There'll be 2 things in HDMI. One, the resolution that you'll send out of your HDMI, and the other one is remote control or control. So essentially you can press play on your television if it's connected to the camera, and the television will send that signal to the camera to press play. So what's happening is if you've got that feature turned on, the remote feature via HDMI. So just go to the HDMI settings. There's only 2 things in HDMI settings for the Nikon cameras. One is resolution and one is control. Turn the control off. That way you can't. What's happening is the ATEM is sending a signal out, and it thinks it's a Blackmagic camera. And the second that your Nikon camera gets a signal, it goes, oh, something wants to play. So some device, it knows it's connected to a device, and the only thing it wants to do when it's connected to a device is play and not stream. So you need to go in and make sure that setting's turned off.
Awesome. Hope that helps. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael is up next with, would the Sony a6400 be a quality camera for a top-of-screen conferencing camera? Which of the two lenses, he has a choice of a 16-50 versus an 18-135, would be the best for that task, and what tripod would you use for a top-of-screen use case?
Go ahead, Jesse.
Yeah, the Sony A6000 series, all of them are really nice. We had I forgot her name, but she's a Canadian broadcaster using one of those A6000s. I think it was just like the 6100. It looked beautiful. So for the money, those seem to be, in my opinion, one of the best, and a lot of influencer types use them. As far as which lens to get, it really depends on how far you are from the camera. Generally, more of a zoom, more of a portrait style depth will give you a more flattering image of yourself. But if you don't have the distance to put your tripod and your camera away from you, then you need something that's going to be more wide angle.
Yeah, good answer. And I wouldn't hesitate to look at some of the primes. The guy, David Foster from Live Streaming Pros, uses that camera with, I believe it's a Sigma 16. It's one of the primes. It's tack sharp with that camera. So zooms are always going to be a little bit soft unless it's a super high end one like the Canon 70-200. It's pretty darn tack sharp. But anytime you're using zooms, it's just not going to be as crystal sharp as a prime. Next question.
Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana says, does anyone have any firsthand experiences with the Thor Maximus 4K Fly 4K HDMI USB ePTZ compact camera they can share? I'm looking for a $500 or less PTZ type controller camera for kits.
Carl.
So it's an ePTZ. So it's not a PTZ camera. It's the same as a Brio. So you can move around inside. So it's a 4K, which you can pan and scan within. So essentially this is a huddle cam. So it has USB out and it has HDMI out. But it doesn't pan and scan like a bird dog would. It doesn't have any motors on it. It simply does it the same way a Brio does.
There you go. So you enter into a digital zoom once you get past HD resolution. So if you're at full HD 1920, once you zoom in 2x, you're into digital zoom. So that same with the huddle cam, just like Carl says. Next question.
Oscar, looks like Ozadiowski in Toronto, Canada says, has anyone worked with the NDI out of Zoom rooms? It just got released. Any feedback?
If anybody did here on the panel, I would not allow them to speak because they shouldn't be talking about it. Those in Fight Club do not talk about Fight Club. So next question.
Moving on. Well, Oscar's back, so let's see if he trips us up again from Toronto. How do you point a Panasonic PTZ HN130 to an NDI Discovery server?
Oh, I haven't played with that camera specifically, but on my Bird Dog, there's a spot in there in the back end. So you go into the IP address and via web browser, and there should be a spot in there to put in the address of a Discovery server. If it doesn't have that, then you're going to have to use MDNS and let it discover via Bonjour the way that some of the other models do. But it should have it in there. I haven't used it that particular model personally. So anybody else on the panel know how to do that? Yeah, and one of the things about those Discovery servers too, NDI5 is going to have a backup one because I'm running one right here behind me. You can probably see all that text. That's a bunch of little numbers that just say listeners and sources. So it basically just an ND Access Manager. Typically, you would point the IP address to that computer, the Discovery server's IP address, and then it just shows up everywhere. And when it goes down, they don't show up any longer. So NDI5 will have a backup, which I'm pretty excited about, to have two machines. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael is up next, and he says, when you look at Victor Cajio's setup, and he's got a link there to it, he uses Keyboard Maestro and the PTZ Optics app to automate camera shots. Could you talk to the Huddle Cam directly like that from QLab if you wrote the code to do so?
Yeah, Roscoe Jones, then Jeffrey.
Well, QLab will put out both MIDI and OSC, so you'd have to obviously be able to translate it into one of those two language protocols. But yeah, you could do anything. I mean, those two can drive a lot of things. It's just how many things do you have to go through to get it to talk to that camera properly.
Jeffrey Powers.
PTZ Optics and Huddle Cam are the exact, pretty much the exact. Well, they're owned by the same person, so it's the same software inside, same remotes and everything like that. I've never done it, but I would put a good percentage that it's very possible.
All righty, next question.
Douglas Carmichael's back. Could a competing platform like Cisco's WebEx be integrated into Makana easily? I could see a real-time translation WebEx offers being useful for multilingual panelists and attendees, and he's got a link there.
Go ahead, Jonas.
All websites can be easily integrated into Makana, and if WebEx would have a web interface, that would be certainly possible. But I don't think anybody wants that because Makana is meant to decouple questions from the stream. So you have an asynchron and you don't need low latency.
Rupert.
Yeah, so like Jonas just said, anything can be integrated with anything, but then you have to keep track of those other vendors' changes. They go changing something, then it breaks your workflow, and now you've got to figure out what went wrong. So in theory, yes, but you also need to keep your focus where you want it to be.
All righty, next question.
This comes to us from Roberto Barrow again, and he says, oh, sorry for the confusion. My question about multi-view on my iPhone was during the pre-show. Usually my view at that time is multi-view. I guess he's just making a comment, not really asking a question. So
yeah, so that's different. In meeting, you have the option where you can pick your view. Unless somebody's spotlighted, it might temporarily overpower you, but then you can switch back to gallery view. And what else can you do in meeting versus webinar? Yeah, I mean, you just basically have the control, and it's all those numbers that we talked about earlier. Next question, Bill.
Yeah, I was just looking for a prop because John Gerard in Berkeley says iPhone 12 Pro Max. Alex recommends the Ceramonics powered amp. I bought the $25 version with the 3.5 millimeter cable out, but I still cannot get any of my Rode and Bolson mics to work. Ceramonics also sells the iPhone version for $100. Will this fix the issue? And
go ahead, Carl.
So while Bill grabs his prop, essentially the 3.5 version was only going to give you mono anyway, because if that has to go into the 3.5 to Lightning connector, that can only handle mono as far as it thinks it's a microphone. So it has stereo output for headphones and mono in for the microphone, like on the headset. But the iPhone version itself with the Lightning connector, inside the Lightning connector is the audio to digital converter, and that can do 2 channels, both directions. So that's a good thing. So that little plug that is a lightning cable, inside that plug is a small, tiny little computer. Inside that computer is a A to D converter and a D to A converter to come back the other way as well for your headphones.
Interesting. Jeffrey Powers, you were holding up something? Ceramonic, that's the, if
yeah,
Jeffrey can spot.
The Ceramonic makes several different versions of this. So this was the, I think this is the first one that they came out with. But then they have bigger ones and smaller ones. But this one will do iPhones and Android phones, and still needs that special TRRS cable for each different phone.
Bill Davis?
I'm failing miserably to find it. I have 2 of them around here, and I thought they were literally within arm's reach, but I'm failing the Alex text, and I cannot get my hands on them. But anyway, the Ceramonics has a 2 XLR input to Lightning output. Each of them have audio controls. They work on a 9-volt battery, and they actually do a very good job of passing audio. So you can actually do independent mixes of 2 sources coming in. So you can have a microphone into one XLR and a line feed from something into the other, and it'll mix right at your camera, right at your phone, and output through an iPhone or anything else. They work well. I've had good luck with them.
All right, looks like our last question of the day will come from Mike at the 7th Scroll. You can take that one, Bill?
Sure. He says, does anyone know how the Sony Xperia Pro with the HDMI port can take video feeds in for Instagram and so forth?
Go ahead, Carl.
So that's app dependent. So I know the Xperia Pro can bring in video in, but the app has to actually allow that to be used. So they can say view webcam only or view internal cameras only. So I think that's why that phone that does have video input has limited range, because most of the apps aren't looking for an external video input, so they just don't see it. So that's why.
And who's going to drop the $2,000 to buy that so we can confirm and play? It looks like Bill's holding up one of the devices that he found hiding in his closet, or where'd you find it, Bill?
I told you, I actually knew I had this within arm's reach. This is the little Ceramonics 2 XLR. It's got switchable recorder play, so it can be operated as an input or an output. It's got 48-volt phantom power that you can turn on and off. It's got a headphone jack and a lightning connector on this end, which goes directly into an iPad or an iPhone to give you audio in and out. And it's a decent little unit. About $150 if I recall correctly.
All right, awesome job, panelists. Just want to say thank you. And for those of you producers who are asking questions, looks like you loaded us up. We got through them all. And even the ones that were downvoted, it's kind of interesting at the end. We get to hit the ones that got the downvotes. I hope to see a day when we get so many questions that we actually can't answer them all. And the downvoted ones are just ones that we don't get to. So I have a feeling once we turn this thing on really and start getting LinkedIn and Facebook and all these other platforms, we're going to see a lot more people and a lot more questions. So I'm excited about the future. And thanks again, everybody, for playing, for watching, and see you guys in the post show.